You're listening to Artistic Finance, show 118. On today's show, I chat with Steve Altinel, the artistic director of the Long Island Musical Theater Festival. We discuss filling the artistic cup, choosing music instead of the family business, the long hours necessary for working in theater, the financial stability of having a teaching job versus freelancing, preparing students to have a leg up in the professional world, coordinating choirs for the Hunchback of Notre Dame at the Argyle Theater, and time management as a high school teacher while balancing professional music director jobs. There are no outtakes from today's episode. Instead, part 2 of this interview will be released next week. We discuss using freelance gigs to save for purchasing an apartment and getting Stephen Schwartz to teach a masterclass and perform for the LIMTF festival. Now, patrons already have access to that episode on their private podcast feed or at patreon.com/artisticfinance. If you're one of our 28 Patreon producers, thank you very much. And if you're listening and you aren't a patron, but you want to support the show, please join up at patreon.com/artisticfinance. And now, without further ado, let's get to the show.
You're listening to Artistic Finance Podcast, where your host, Ethan Steimel, interviews successful artists, leaders, and investors to help educate and inspire artists to grow their wealth.
Welcome and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Ethan Steimel, along with my co-host, our producer, Nicole Steimel.
Hello.
And today I'm welcoming musical director, musician, and high school choir teacher, Steve Altinel, to the show. Welcome, Steve.
Welcome.
Hello, thanks for having me.
All right, so we're recording this on October 1st, 2022. Steve, what is the news in the world today that you're following?
Not much, actually, and I'm enjoying that. I'm just focused on myself and my shows and my own musical endeavors.
I love that. Did you hear the Queen died?
Oh, yeah. For a second, I thought you meant the
Queen?
band. I was like, wait, what? No, that much.
I love that you went
know.
to Queen, the band, first. See, that shows how dedicated you are to music.
Did you hear that Phantom is closing?
I did, yep. I think that's okay.
We all do.
It's time for some fresh blood.
Content.
This is a side note, but I was looking at the Internet Broadway database for this lighting designer named Richard Pilbrow, and I was just going through shows he had done, and I clicked on one, and it said it was in the Majestic Theater, and I was like, oh my gosh, that means it was 40 years ago, because nothing else has been in there for 35 years except for Phantom.
But do you know about Carol Burnett trying to change the name of the Majestic?
What's she going to change it to?
See, you're following the news, but you don't know the big stuff. No, they're trying to name it after Harold Prince because he directed the show. And, you know, we're in a wave of naming these theaters after these new Broadway artists. So why not Harold Prince?
Yeah, funny you say new Broadway artists.
Well,
yeah, no,
you know.
I think that's appropriate because he did so much and has such a legacy that if there's somebody for a theater to be named at, Harold Prince is an obvious one.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we'll see. She'll succeed probably.
I hope so.
All right. Okay. So now just a couple icebreakers that I ask everybody, and you are not immune. So, Steve, what is a live event that you like to experience as an audience member?
Broadway shows.
Okay. All right. If you had to see one today, which would it be?
Like today, October 1st, 2022. I would say Come From Away because it's closing tomorrow. And I love that show. I think it is brilliant. I talk about it with my students all the time because it's, I talk about 9/11 and it's, one of those pieces that came out of that event that I lived through and we don't really see the effects of it until we're far removed from it. And, you know, I connected to the pandemic and what they're experiencing now and have been the past few years, because 10 years from now, there's probably going to be a ton of art, music reflected based on this time period.
Nice. All right. So now financial personality here. Are you good or bad with money?
That's a loaded question. I think I'm good. I think because I am by myself and I don't have responsibilities of a significant other or children or pets. I'm worried about myself. And for me and myself, I think I'm doing fine. And I'm grateful for it.
Yeah.
And you have a fantastic story, too, how you got to where you are.
Yeah, and I look at you just because I've worked with you and I know you, and to me, you have your life together, including your financial life. And
I don't always feel that way, but I appreciate you saying it.
But that's actually why I wanted to have you on the show, because Nathan Brewer, who's a director I've worked with and you've worked with, and we all know, he was once telling me when I didn't know who you were, because you were the musical director on this show, and so he goes, oh, let me tell you about Steve. And he started telling me the story of your life, and specifically the thing that jumped out at me was the fact that you went to all these college auditions by yourself. Like, your family didn't go with you. You just went, got on the plane, went and did them, and you sort of didn't go into the family business. I don't know if you call it a family business, but there's something your family does that you were like, nah, I'm going to be a musician. And I was just very impressed that you sort of went against the grain. Would you mind telling us about you and like how you got into music, or how you got into the career that you are in now?
Well, again, loaded question. I'll try to be as brief as possible. But, I stand corrected. My mother did come with me to one audition. But, I had immigrant parents. They came from Turkey, and my mother was 17 and my dad was 27. They got married, when she was 16, and then came over here and then just lived the American dream. So everything they were, my dad was a hustler. He was always working 7 days a week. I remember as early as 8 years old, but really from the time I was born, they would take me to the store and just thought I would go into the family business with my brother. And I remember, I guess it was third grade, we did a class musical, and I was obsessed with the pianist. So I just wanted to know more about it. And I had begged my parents for lessons for a few years, and they just thought it was a phase. Finally, I think it was fifth grade that they finally agreed to rent a piano and get me some lessons. And then within 8 months, I was practicing piano at my school. My middle school choir director, who still is one of my closest friends today, her name is Maria Mikumsky. I would stand outside her room every morning waiting for her to get there so I could play on her piano. And within 8 months, I started playing for the school chorus. So she gave me an opportunity. I think it was either late fifth grade or sixth grade. And then when I was in eighth grade, I started playing some music for the school shows.
So young. All of our music directors were elderly.
You know what it is? I think not having it for a few years and wanting it made me really hungry. So I just went through the pages really quickly. And then I started directing the music teacher. When she would come, I'd be like, I made it through the whole book. And she'd be like, no, 1 page a week. And I'm like, well, I already went through the whole book, so I need to fire you and get a new piano teacher. So I did do that. And then when I was in ninth grade and I was in the school musicals, I would walk over to the middle school and I would music direct those shows while I was in high school. And I didn't have many friends, which was a good thing at the time. So I would spend a lot of my free time in the library, and I would take out scores and then go to the media center and listen to the soundtracks on the Discman. They would have those little workstations, and I would just follow the score as I was listening to the music. And that's how I spent a lot of my free time. But yeah, and then I remember going into the family business because I always worked at the jewelry store, and there was a part of me that loved the social aspect of it. And I will say, I talk about this with the fundraising that I do for choral events that we do, even chocolate sales. And, they'll always be so impressed with how I organize money. And when we count it, I'm always off. But if I'm ever off, it's by $1 or $2. And they said, they'll tell me there are people who've been doing this for 20 years who still don't get it right. But I grew up watching my dad count thousands of dollars in cash at the end of the week, so I didn't really know what was going on, but I was there, but not actively a part of it. But it definitely influenced me. I mean, how many people can say that they've seen that much cash? You know what I mean? I think especially people today, don't see thousands of dollars in cash and wouldn't, counting it as it's a skill. Like you had to put things in like the same order, like every bill needs to face the same direction, all of that kind of thing. Like those are things I learned from watching my dad and his business. So I definitely think that influenced me in what I'm doing now, but I didn't know it at the time.
Yeah, and we'll talk about this later, the Long Island Musical Theater Festival, but I know that when I light it for you, you sort of say, like, how much money do you need to light, or how much money do you have? And anytime I say, like, we need this, you're like, well, that's another expense, but we'll figure it out. And you're just very pragmatic about it, and you're like, okay, well, whatever the amount of money is that we need, that's what we'll get, and we'll figure out, like, yeah, maybe we don't have it now, but we'll go get it.
But I also trust that you're not going to take advantage or be greedy, you know, because you're also not taking the easy way out. You're like, we really need this, or like, it'd be great if we had a fog machine.
Yeah.
We need that smoke.
Well, and also Nathan Brewer loves follow spots, but you and I are like, well, that's more money, that's more crew, that's more everything. So every year it's like, do we do follow spots? Do we not do follow spots?
I mean, but he's always right. So
well, of course he's always right.
Don't tell him that.
Well, I mean, yeah. Okay.
No, he will appreciate me saying it.
Okay. So can you talk us through like how you got into music? Like, because you had like, you were connected to finance in a sense through that family business through immigrant parents with a shop, et cetera, like that. Why and how did you decide I'm going to continue on with this music thing instead of just letting it be a hobby?
It's weird because it's like, oh my God, I'm going to say the cliche thing. It's like, it kind of chose me. It's like, I didn't know it was the only thing that was like my driving force to get up and go to school, which I know it is for a lot of artists. And it was the only thing that gave me attention. And I loved it. I loved people knowing me as the piano man, but as I got older in high school, I would play rehearsals and then be like, what are you doing tonight? They'd be like, we're going to the movies. I'd be like, that's nice. I'd be like, are you going to invite me? And then I'd be like, these jerks just like using me for my like piano skills, to play for their shows and cabarets and everything, but they didn't invite me to hang out, So it was one of those things that I loved. I loved being in the choir, singing a song, then coming down and then play. Like I literally played for every like accompanied song. And looking back on it, that saved them money because they didn't have to hire a pro pianist because I had the skills to do it, which is a rarity today. I will say that my assistant music director, Craig Coyle, who's awesome, I met him as a student and he reminded me a lot of myself because he did have that kind of skill when he was a high school student. And then he went to my alma mater at Westminster, which is why I hire him and we jive now. So it was one of those things where it was just like my path and what I did, and I just followed it. And I loved doing it. And the more I did it, the better I got at it. And I really just didn't like, just business and worrying about money all the time and not realizing that being a musician, you have to worry about money all the time too.
Yeah.
Which is why I went into education too. But that was always a part of it. But one of the defining moments I would say is my older sister, Tina. She was in the high school choir. And I remember when I was in 7th grade, I went to see her in her choral performance. And I was just like, goosebumps everywhere. I was moved so much. And then I was like, I think this is what I want to do. It just like hit me. When I was in 7th grade and I saw her do that, I was like kind of waiting for the moment that I'd be in that group. Although she didn't go into music, it still introduced me to like a sophisticated version of it. And I still carry on some of those traditions today with my own high school choirs.
Oh my gosh. I love that. I also love that you're talking about your family being artistic, because when I think of the rest of your family, I don't think of them as like big arts buffs.
I think Tina really loved it in a way that if she felt she could be supported doing it, she would. Mm-hmm. She was also an artist. And actually, funny story, in 4th grade, there was a contest I could say it now. There was a contest for the program cover of the spring concert of like student artists. And I remember my sister was a few years older than me and she loved art and she was like drawing all the time. So I asked her to like do it for me. So I submitted it as my own artwork. And it won.
And she never knew?
No, she knew, but the people, like the choir director, didn't know. But I held on to that for the longest time, and it's an image that I still remember to this day, because in fourth grade you did recorder, so there was like a recorder in the middle of it, and it was like fourth grade spring concert, and there was like a drum set in one corner. So yeah, I was plagiarism in fourth grade. It was bad.
Stephen.
Yeah. That is hilarious.
A dark side to your past.
All right, so you said that your mother went with you to one of your college auditions. So, which that's also a great thing for me to hear, because I have seen your parents and they are supportive of you. So I remember when Nathan Brewer was saying he just went on his own, I was thinking like, what?
I mean, I did go to a Carnegie Mellon Pittsburgh audition by myself. That was one of the big ones. I remember they gave me, I didn't know what I was doing. I really and there were no cell phones at the time. So that was the biggest one, but I did it by myself. Also, why didn't anyone tell me not to apply to Carnegie Mellon? Because I was rejected 3 times from that school. once academically, once from the piano department, once from the voice department.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, this podcast's only connection to Carnegie Mellon is that they have some sort of arts and business page and they put us on there as a resource. But other than that, we have no connection to them. So
listen, it's a beautiful school and I loved the campus. But yeah, even like when my mom was there, she didn't know what was going on. I had to like basically get myself up, wake her up, be like, we have to go here. I have to go warm up. And, it was like, and I remember my Westminster audition, I think Tina came with me. And I just remember being lost at like the Wawa, and we had never heard of the Wawa. And she like called like on a payphone to like a cab company to be like, we're at this place called the Wawa, so not that they weren't supportive. I just don't think that they didn't know. But I will say like, they didn't come to my things, and I was always in things, but also they worked a small family business. So during the holidays, they had this thing called Marathon. They worked from 10 to 10 every day. And that's, when all the concerts were. And so they didn't come to much. But I will say in my adult life, I think now that they realize that they've given up on me going into the jewelry business. They finally realized that it's not happening. But they did nag me for about I would say 6-7 years after I started teaching. Be like, are you sure you know what? I was like, yes, I think I'm sure. So it's come a long way, and I'm very happy from what I have learned from them, even though they don't fully understand it.
Yeah, well, that's another thing is when parents have children that are going into the arts, they always want their children to have a stable career. They also want to be supportive of their kids, and that involves supporting them, but not knowing what the arts entails. Because if you don't come from that background, you don't know that going to the events is important. You don't know how much rehearsal time is required. Plus, of course, you have your own life and your own business. A long time ago, we had a set designer named Wilson Chin on the show, and his parents had a restaurant. And he said that in high school, he would always have to work at the restaurant. But of course, Friday and Saturday nights are big restaurant nights. And so he felt guilty because he's like, well, I have to be at the theater on Friday and Saturday night. And he's like, it's not that my parents weren't supportive. It's just that they have this business and they have to be there. And so they can't come to the theater things.
I still have conversations with my older sister, Jennifer. I had a conversation just a year ago. I remember she's like, wow, you really like going to shows. I was like, actually, I don't. I mean, half the time it's out of necessity or obligation. You have to support your friends and their projects, or if you get free tickets to something, you're going to go. Or if it's a student's project, and if I'm available, I go. And she's like, wow, you really like going to shows. I was like, it's part of the job. And she's like, oh, I never it blows my mind that people really don't think of it that way, that this is, networking. It's part of the process. It's part of meeting people. And also I look at it as research, because if I'm going to sit in auditions and play shows, I need to know the material. And I'd rather sit in the theater and watch it than listen to it on YouTube.
Yeah, I don't think people realize how much there really goes into, going into theater or arts of some sort. I know I didn't even marry an Ethan, but I mean, it's so much more than just lighting some lights on the stage. It is a networking. It's the long hours. It's going places, traveling to find work. It's super comprehensive.
And I just recently on Instagram started following this health coach in the UK because they're for backstage theater artists. And so they're posting all this stuff to say, one of my clients just last week wasn't able to work out, or wasn't able to work out very much because they were in tech for 70 plus hours. You can't get up at 5 a.m. every day because you went to bed at 2 or 3 in the morning. And like, it's just this whole dichotomy of people who aren't in the arts versus people who are. And all the people that are just sort of understand like, oh yeah, you are going to have those 70 plus hour weeks. You are going to have all this stuff. You do have to go to all your students' shows, even if that's like 5 shows in a week. Yeah, that's 10 hours of your life plus commute.
I mean, it's fun. It's enjoyable stuff. There are worse ways to spend your time.
True. We could all be on drugs or whatever. I mean, more drugs than we are already. What am I saying? I've said too much. Okay, so I just want to circle back to something you said earlier, which is you being invited to parties. And I will say that everybody should invite Steve Altinel to parties, because I have not been to a party with you where you did not start playing the piano and everybody starts singing musical theater shows. So like, even if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see this piano back behind me. When Steve came over, what does he do? He sits down at the piano and he starts playing, and then we all sing along. And
it's the life of the party.
What I'm saying is everybody invite Steve, because inevitably you will sing musical theater karaoke.
But you need sheet music from me. I don't play from memory.
You have phones you can play off to Google it.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a way around it.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm just saying you're wonderful to be at parties, because inevitably musical theater songs start
likewise
with live music.
So much fun.
Taking a break from the episode to mention our Patreon page. Now, the perks of being a patron are that you get a private podcast feed, which includes the early release of next week's episode. Now, that's part 2 of this interview. We'll discuss rooting for the underdog, the Real Housewives of New Jersey, payment schedules for public school salaries, raising money for producing a musical festival, and getting Stephen Schwartz, Alice Ripley, and Rema Webb to teach masterclasses and perform at the LIMTF festival. This show is free, but some of our running costs are covered by you, the patrons, including our latest patron, lighting designer Heather Gilbert. Not only did Heather become a patron, she sent an absolutely lovely note thanking me for the show, which means a lot. Now, Heather chose to save 6% by pledging a yearly amount up front, and in doing so, not only is she keeping Artistic Finance on the air, she is giving monthly support to more than 30 freelancers with side hustles. That is because 25% of the income generated from this show goes back to support artists or arts organizations. And of course, Heather and all the patrons are supporting our mission to improve the finances of freelancers, provide an answer to any financial question without anyone fearing shame, stigma, or guilt, and getting artists to invest for themselves and their future. If you want to jump in and help us continue this work, please sign up at patreon.com/artisticfinance. And now, back to the show. Okay, so now another reason I wanted you on the show is because you are a high school musical teacher or choir teacher, and that's a full-time job, and you're very good at it. You're always doing concerts and et cetera, et cetera. But the other thing is you freelance outside of that, which to me is a very unique thing, because you work, it seems like you work on as many shows as I work on every year, but you have this full-time job. Mm-hmm. How do you do that? Like right now you're working on a show right now, and like how do you have the time for that?
Well, evening rehearsals, it is tricky, but like I will say I do less in regards to productions now than I used to, because when I started, I started as a leave replacement in one school, and then from there I was music directing for their show, and then that director was directing somewhere else, and she pulled me into the other school. Also, that was a school that didn't really have the strongest music program amongst high school kids, so they hired professionals. My first year out of college, I was hired to music direct Les Mis, and they wanted me to be the vocal director. And then I was like, you know what? I really want to conduct this. I was like, they're like, do you think you could do it? I was like, I know Les Mis better than any show. And they hired like a 28-piece orchestra. And I was 22 conducting this orchestra. And it was on the weekend of one of my closest friends' weddings from college. Oh, wow. And, I talk about this today. That's the other thing. As a performer, as a musician, as an artist, you had to make those kinds of decisions. It was one of those first adult decisions where I was like, do I conduct this show that this is again, an opportunity that I've never had before, or go to like one of my best friend's weddings. And I decided to stay and do the show. And she understood, and we're still very close to this day. But that experience, gave me the network of musicians that some of which I still work with to this day, and we're talking this like 18 years ago. And then from there, I did the Catholic school and I stayed there for 10 years. And then from there, after the leave replacement, I got a job in another high school. And then I started doing the musical there. But for 1 year, overlapped with the school I did the leave replacement with before. So there was like a few years where I was doing 3 high school musicals at a time. But this was before I had an organization, before but then I had to go to grad schools because to keep my teaching certification, I had to finish a master's degree while working. So there were days where I would be teaching my full day. I would go to my grad class, then back to the high school for an evening rehearsal. And I don't know how I did that. So to me, now that I'm doing the college gig, it's a little simpler, but I think I just manage it better now. But I will say I'm tired getting up at 5:45 to be in a high school working with high school kids at 7:30 every day after I'm at a rehearsal till 9, 10 o'clock. It's tough. But with what I do outside of the school, it really like fills my cup, as someone mentioned to me the other day. What I do with the high school kids, I love it in different ways, but it doesn't challenge my musical skills. So for me as a pianist, it's like, if I did that and nothing else, I don't think I'd be happy. And even now I'm getting to a point like, I'm now teaching, I think this is year 12 in the high school I've been in, plus 6 years. I've been teaching 18 years. Creatively, I want to get to the next level with my own musicianship skills.
Well, I will say that you music directed Peter and the Starcatcher down at New York Film Academy. Josie Wilson was directing it, and then you showed up as musical director, which was great for me. I was like, I know this guy.
Yeah. It's always fun when you have that team of people that you really know and trust. And that's such a big part of it too, getting to spend time with people you love who are like-minded creatively. So it's going to work, but it's also like hanging with your friend.
Yeah, exactly. But also, I remember thinking when you were there, you were balancing your full-time job, and it was like concert season at your school, and you were doing this show. So you were very clear on like, we're going to work music on this day, this day, this day. And you came in so prepared. And those students were so lucky because you came in as like a professional music director and were just no nonsense. I mean, you're very good and you're very kind and all that, but you were just like, all right, let's do it. We need to work on this section. Go back. Let's do it. And I thought this is an amazing experience for those students who weren't necessarily music students. They were more acting students, but they benefited so much because of how professional you are.
I work often with people who are not musicians. That is one thing. I talk about this with Nathan all the time because we are equally educators as we are directors of our own crafts. And listen, when you are a public school teacher, the amount of things you have to deal with in a day, it's just the processing, the managing of all of it, and special needs and parents and administrators and lockdown drills and fire drills and attendance lists and fundraisers and planning trips. It is endless. And that doesn't even have to do with the actual job you were hired to do. All those skills, as much as I might not love all of them, it helps me organize and manage so many other things that I think if you don't have that experience are not as maybe efficient with time. And when you are dealing with multiple projects, you just have to know what you're doing. And I think having a plan and a schedule is very important.
Is your motivation for taking these outside jobs, these outside professional jobs, is it money? Is it to fill your cup? Is it to do people favors or help people out?
All of the above. All of the above. With that situation, I didn't know the show and I didn't realize how much music there was. But when she told me that, we're going to simplify this as much as possible, we're not dealing with musicians here. And I was like, I could give you this, this, and this. take it or leave it. You know what I mean? So sometimes when I am busy, I'll be like, if you want me, I could only be there for 4 rehearsals, but I could get it done, and if that means making tracks or whatever I have to do, you do. Or hiring an assistant. You could get me like most of the time, but a few days, like when you're running things, I'm going to bring in a pianist to play for you. And if that's cool and that's understood, then great. And if not, then I'll have to pass.
Well, can I ask you about the Argyle Theater out in Long Island? Because I've seen you do shows out there. And I know a lot of professional designers that are working out there, but they don't have full-time jobs in addition to that. So I'm just wondering how you manage that schedule.
The Argyle Theater started because they were doing the Hunchback of Notre, and I believe it was maybe their second season. The music contractor there is a friend of mine who's played in many of my shows and introduced me to the artistic director there, and they needed a plan for the choir because the Hunchback of Notre Dame requires a very large, very difficult, sophisticated score of a lot of heavy choral singing. So we met and I devised a plan to have high school kids audition and create this rotating choir situation. So I was the choral director, but also was fortunate enough to get to conduct the show a few times when the music director was not available. So we kind of tag teamed there. It was tricky because I rehearsed everybody together. And then we had to create spreadsheets because we had to create a rotating choir because they performed 6 shows a week over, I think, 6 weeks during the holiday season. I didn't even have this conversation with the artistic director until September. So I created this plan, and fortunately enough, through the organization, had kids audition through the Long Island Musical Theater Festival to create this choir. And I think we had over 60 kids, and every night we had anywhere from like 10 to 20 kids on stage. And that was a huge task, but again, it was something I loved. That was the kind of thing that filled my cup, right? So it was one of those things where the work and the score, I'm just obsessed with that score. If there's one show that I can conduct professionally right now, I think that would be one of them for sure. And so I didn't have to be there as frequently. You know what I mean? So I did my own rehearsals, and then I conducted, I think, 5 performances, and then I would check in on the show. I think maybe once a week I would go in and just give a listen and give some notes. And then from there, they asked me to do the producers. And that was because the music director was based in New York City and was setting the show, but couldn't commit to the Long Island schedule. So it was kind of perfect for me because I couldn't commit to the daytime rehearsals because of my teaching job. But that was the kind of experience that did fill my cup. Because for the first time I was working with a full cast of professionals, which had not happened before. And speaking financially, I did take a hit because I gave up a college position. I gave up a college show to take the gig at the Argyle. I had just started there. It was at Nassau Community College, and I loved my experience there. And it paid, I'm going to be honest, public college, not private college, but it was, it's a state school. And it was probably the best paying music directing gig I have ever had. It was one of those moments where I had to decide, am I going to keep this gig and keep the heavier paycheck, or take the cut and add this professional gig to my resume? I had also to this point never done a run for more than like 2 weeks. So that was another thing that I wanted to experience. What is it like playing a show for 6 weeks, which again is not a huge run, but the longest that I've had to this date. And so I took it and I passed on that gig to my music assistant, who I know loved the work and was available, and it was in good hands. You know what I mean? And someone who needed the work more so than me, because I have the steady income doing the teaching job. And then after that, the pandemic hit, and, they hire a lot of New York-based music directors, which I understand. And, there are many theaters out here that do that. I wish I had more opportunities as a Long Island-based music director to work in the Long Island houses, but that's their choice. And I fill my time with other opportunities when they come up.
I just have so much respect for you because you're getting up at 5:45 every day, and then you do things like go and take a 6-week run of a show, which also means rehearsals. So you're talking eight weeks or more.
I will say, it's like when they say, if you want something done, give it to someone who's busy.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The truth is, when I am off, I don't get anything done. Like I'll sit on a vacation. If I have no plans, I'll be like, how the heck did I do all that? And like having the schedule adds structure and allows me to fit different things in between. With this show, with doctor's appointments, I'm like, okay, so Tuesdays and Thursdays are my days at Adelphi. So I could go to the doctor's appointment. I'm like, do you have like a 4:00 slot? So I could like leave work, go to the doctor's appointment, get something to eat, then go to rehearsal. And so I, run my errands in between. Whereas if I was just home, I might not ever leave my apartment and get anything done.
No, that makes complete sense.
And Nicole is always saying that because not to talk about her work, but people are constantly asking her for things that are like well above and beyond what she should be doing. And
you want something done, you give it to the busiest person and they'll get it done.
Yeah, so she's the busiest person. They layer things on top.
Yeah.
But Nicole, isn't there a part of you that kind of likes it too?
Sometimes.
Sometimes until she snaps.
Sometimes, and then there's a breaking
Yes.
point. And I'm like, all right, enough.
That breaking point. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
All right, so Steve, now let's move on to, you've mentioned this organization, the Long Island Musical Theater Festival, because this is in addition to everything that we've already talked about. So just very quickly, what is the Long Island Musical Theater Festival?
The Long Island Musical Theater Festival is, we call it a pre-professional training program. It's a 2-week summer musical theater intensive. And really it started because our mutual friend Nathan Brewer and I have been working his summer theater camp programs together since our days in college. So we go back to Princeton and we were talking one day and I was like, I just want to do a good show with like a full professional orchestra because I had done it for 10 years at that Catholic high school that I mentioned before. And we always had these full orchestras and there's nothing like it. And I was tired of going to shows and just like people doing things with, canned orchestrations. I mean, literally, I went to a production of The Secret Garden and it was to a track. And the people in front of me during intermission be like, oh my God, that orchestra is amazing. And I'd be like,
you're like, excuse me.
And then I turned to them. I was like, yeah, they didn't miss a note.
Oh.
Like they don't have any idea, but so I wanted to do The Secret Garden. It was like a show that is not done ever. I mean, this was also 10 years ago.
Nicole's been in it. Nicole was in it.
The music is so good. Yeah, long time ago.
It's stunning. So I just wanted to do a show. And then from there, and we had a summer music and arts program in our high school. So we kind of channeled it through there. So I got the facility for free for a few years. And it was good because I got to recruit my own students to do it. And, it has since evolved. And then, it was Nathan's idea to, if we're going to call it a festival, we had to do more than one thing. And so then, we started bringing in, like that year, we brought in Susan Schulman, who directed the original Broadway production, to teach a masterclass. And then the second year, we did Drowsy Chaperone, brought in Beth Level and Greg Barnes, who is also a friend of Nathan and Skies, his husband, and they worked on the Broadway show together. So he came in with Beth for a day, which also for like the Drowsy Chaperone to work with the Drowsy Chaperone in an amateur production. And again, that's like, they don't get to do that often. And so from there, I think the third year, we decided to do a review, like a full review, and bring in a Broadway guest artist, not only to teach the masterclass, but to perform with the students. So we did Merrily We Roll Along, and I was like, I'm going to reach out to Liz Calloway. I don't know how I made that happen. I really don't. But she came, taught a masterclass, and then performed, this iconic performer who had her Broadway debut doing Merrily We Roll Along and working with the kids. So we do 2 productions in 2 weeks. And basically what it does is it provides the kids who are not principal roles in the main stage a solo opportunity in the review. And this is it's an opportunity that I never had as a kid because I was always the piano man, but I really wanted to be the star of the show. But no one thought I was a singer. They're like, oh, you play the piano. So even to this day, for music directors or pianists or whatever you do, you get pigeonholed into like this thing that they think that you do. Like, oh, I don't know Sean Hayes could sing. I thought he was just an actor, or whatever it is. So it gives every kid an opportunity to work towards something. And it's an opportunity. So I root for the underdog. If there's a kid who has some ability and works hard and wants it bad enough, if you train them, they'll be successful.
This is amazing. I love hearing you say this because I have been lighting your shows for the festival since 2015. I've done 6 of them. And I never once knew that you were rooting for the underdog. I never knew once that you were giving opportunities to everybody. Like, this is news to me. I just thought you were doing shows.
The truth is, it's like, I remember there's Lola Lama, if you're listening. She's now at NYU, but when I first coached her, oh my God, this girl wouldn't even open her mouth. You know, she was just so... And then it was just like,
sorry, Lola.
But listen, she knows this. I tell this story all the time, and I started chipping away, and she had like one solo line, and then I finally got her to like belt it, you know, and she just like let it out. And then the second year, it was just like she was like ready for it, like hungry for it. And then she got like a supporting role. And then the third year she came back, she was playing Vendla in Spring Awakening. You know what I mean? And had it not been for that small opportunity to give her that solo moment, who knows? I mean, she would have gotten there somehow, but being a part of that, which is why we call it a training program. And it's intensive. When kids are just there for 8 hours a day doing this one thing, it allows them to really focus on the craft with no distractions.
Well, I'm now thinking, so this year we did Pippin, and I remember there was a moment where we're teching, I'm writing the light cues, we're going cue to cue, Nathan's, stopping everybody, say, oh, Ethan needs to light it, stop, hold. And I remember at some point, some character comes out and says a line, and they're all going to be mic'd, right? So eventually they'll all be heard. But Nathan stopped the whole rehearsal and he said, do that line again. And they did it again, and they just weren't loud enough. Like, they weren't being their character, they weren't projecting. And he said, okay, that was better, do it again. And he just made them do it again. And then he said, I'm going to have to take the line away from you if you can't do it. And I'm not saying that to terrify any future student that might attend this or perform in one of these shows, but that's an illustration of how you guys are training, and you're bringing the best out of everybody, because it's like he easily could have just let the rehearsal go on, not forced that person to like bring out the character. He's like, no, we're here to train these people how to be actors, and we're going to do it.
I think about this all the time. I'm working with college kids, high school kids. I just had dinner with one of our former students, Sam Hoffman, and his mother, Michelle Millardi, who had a Broadway career on her own and still like working all the time. She just played one of the lead roles in Footloose at the Argyle, and she's teaching, and she works for us working with our middle school kids. He just finished a cruise and he was performing constantly. And he said he like learned a song in the morning and had to put it in the show like that night. And this is the reality. And you talking about all these conversations about swings and understudies, it's like, if you want to pursue this, that's just kind of the game. And I never knew that growing up, so most of these kids don't either. So if they truly want to pursue this, then those are skills that are going to set them, I think, further ahead than some of the rest.
I agree. Being prepared is so important. And actually, a lot of listeners to this show are not actors or performers. They're lighting, sound, etc. And I'm going to have a dresser on, like a costume, makeup, hair person. And something that they said is they're like, I know 6 tracks on Broadway. So like I can go sub into 6 different shows because I know the track.
As a dresser.
As a dresser / wig person / makeup person. But it's the same thing as performing, of like, you have to learn it in the morning and then go execute it for the show that evening. And if you know how to do that, if you're organized in your brain space and in your body, like to be able to do that, then opportunities are going to find you. Regardless of whether or not you're going to have a career as a performer, that training is important.
But as a music director, you're never just doing one thing either. For me, I'm doing the choral thing. I do vocal lessons. I do accompanying. I do auditions. So I think as an artist, you're never just doing that one thing. But you could do that one thing. But if you are truly trying to make a financial living, you have to have skills to put yourselves in different opportunities to take the gigs if they come up.
And one last thing I'll say about, you mentioned it's a professional training program. Another thing is that you guys only rehearse for 2 weeks.
So we have them submit a audition via video. From there, we do an in-person callback about a month before we start. So then we will cast the show via email and tell them this is your role. But here's the thing. I like other high school directors and community theaters. I don't just send out a list. I don't want anyone to know who's playing anyone's role. So it'll be like, Nicole, you will be playing the role of Venla in Spring Awakening on Friday night, if it's double cast, things like that. So if they really want to know, they have to figure it out on their own. And I don't want them to compare. After that, then we'll decide what we're doing in the review and who we have left, who needs a solo opportunity. And this is also for rehearsal purposes too. So if we're doing Sweeney Todd, the two leads are going to be in one room with one director while the other kids are doing a group number for the review. The scheduling is really tricky to figure out, but there has to be multiple things going on at a time to make it happen within 2 weeks. But the other thing is, working with high school kids, there's a lot of drama that can happen behind the stage. And if they're that busy, there's no room for bull.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
That's part of it. Part of the reason why there's so many discipline issues when you have a cast of 60 kids, if they're just hanging out and they're not busy, then they're going to develop cliques because it's going to be all the chorus kids together and they're going to be like angry at like all the leads doing all their things. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, if they're always busy, then those cliques can't form. And then our cast really form a strong bond because it's not competitive, and it teaches them that, yes, you're in the ensemble, but you're equally as important to this production as the star. But they're not treated that way outside of our program.
Well, I'm sure anybody listening is thinking, like, if you're in an amateur production of a show, you probably have a 6-week rehearsal period. And it'll be evenings, it'll be whatever, but you have that long to learn your lines, etc. But they have to come into that rehearsal with lines memorized. Like, because there's just no time. You can't learn it in 2 weeks.
Yeah, but it's a fine line. We don't want them to have just like one, like they have to be malleable. Some kids rehearse it a certain way, but it's tricky. And we don't always know. And sometimes if I'm on the fence, I will call the choir director and be like, what do you know about this kid? Because that's the other thing, being a choral director and going to, again, talking about networking, going to conferences. I also present at a lot of conferences. These are the kinds of things that get people introduced to who I am and the kind of work that I do, but also me getting to know the directors and to recruit. And then if I have a question, I could go to them directly because I had that personal interaction with them.
I mean, it's just like any other regular job too. You call someone up for a reference, the conferences, all of that, it's really all the same.
Yeah. I'm just so impressed by it because it's 2 weeks. Because the only time I work with students is at the Long Island Musical Theater Festival.
You were so hesitant.
Well, because I say this to people, it's like, I don't know how to act around children. Like, it's just, there's
and they get younger every year.
They get younger every year. But it's like, because I've now reached the point in my life where college students look like high schoolers. Like, I can't tell the difference.
Yeah.
And that was a rough pill for me to swallow. Like, oh, this person's 14. No, they're actually 24. But yeah, I don't know how to act around children, but that's okay because I just sort of like do the lighting and I only have to interact if I need to go like make a shutter cut up on stage or something.
Admit it, aren't they fun to be around?
No, and I'm amazed by the talent. Like this year for Pippin, I walked in and they were doing a number, I don't know, some group number, and I walked in and it was so beautiful sounding. I was like, oh my gosh, these Morning Glow, these students are so talented. I just like stopped because I had like some bags with me or something, and I just stopped and listened because it was so beautiful. I was like, oh my gosh, Nathan and Steve are so good at this.
And Meg. Don't forget Meg.
And Meg.
He's been with us since I think Violet. It's been 6 or 7 years.
Meg choreographer, yeah. That's it for this week's episode. My takeaway from the show is the stability of a teaching job. It's enabled Steve to have a reliable income and the structure to work on outside projects. That is a balance that works very well for Steve, and yes, it takes him from certain shows that require a full-time music director, but the payoff seems worth it. I also noticed how much time and energy Steve puts into music and training students to be prepared for the professional world. When we think about dedicated teachers, I think we think about people like Steve. So what did you think? Did you enjoy this interview? Let me know by emailing me directly at artisticfinancepodcast@gmail.com. Now, I check all the emails and I'll get back to you, and I absolutely love suggestions or thoughts. If you don't want to email me, but you want to support the show, please consider becoming a patron. You'll get early access to episodes, including next week's, where we discuss the finance schedule for public school teachers and raising money to produce the summer musicals. Thank you to our patrons. You support our mission to normalize financial conversations among creative professionals, and we do that by providing freelancers answers to any financial question in the safest space possible. Some of the topics we've learned about on the show are complicated and others aren't, but even the simple concepts can be complicated if you don't know anything about it. So anyone listening, please feel free to ask any questions without worrying what anyone thinks. If you want to help support the mission, join up at patreon.com/artisticfinance. Thank you in advance. If you aren't ready to become a patron, but you want early access to next week's episode, there are 2 free ways of doing that. Just email me at artisticfinancepodcast@gmail.com, and I'm always happy to share the early releases or the outtakes from any episode. The other way you can access early releases is by signing up for our newsletter. So every month we include a link to a free outtake or an early release. Sign up on artisticfinance.com, or again, email me at artisticfinancepodcast@gmail.com. So that's it for today. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on your podcast app or on YouTube to be notified when part 2 is released next week. Until then, break a leg.
Thank you for listening to Artistic Finance. Make sure to subscribe. To access our show notes, transcripts, or resources, go to artisticfinance.com. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Before making any decision, consult a professional. This show is copyrighted by Artistic Finance. Written permission must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting.